Hello and welcome to the Leaders Council podcast with me, Joshua Jackson. This podcast is all about hearing from authentic leaders from across the country, gaining an understanding of the mindsets of the people that get up each day and make this country work. Today I'm speaking with Matthew Moore, Senior Partner at Gales Solicitors. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Sure. Thank you. Good to be here.
No, thank you ever so much. And, some regular listeners may very well remember Matthew appearing on the show in the midst of the COVID lockdown. So, it's good to have you back, and hopefully we can get some insights into the challenges and changes both within the organisation and probably personally as well, as we go on today. But if you wouldn't mind, just to start with, can you just give a bit of background about yourself and Gales?
Yes, indeed. I'm a solicitor. I've 20 years post-qualification. I also have been on the board of local charity and was for many years the chair of the Local Citizens Advice, which is one of those honours that you tend to get generously given when you're a high street solicitor. The firm is a relatively small high street firm. We try and deal with everything that most people will come across during the course of their lives. So really geared for providing a service for individuals and families.
So that seems quite varied, not only having obviously being the senior partner, having the business side, being a solicitor, having to deal with all of that, but then also, taking on the charitable elements as well. And, those honorary roles, it must show that you are, sort of well-rounded as a person and a business leader.
I certainly like to think so. I suspect a trifle inexperience when I was first asked if I would like to join the board may also have been part of it. But to be fair, it was interesting because it gave me some insight into a very different type of business, a very different world. And I would certainly say I found it useful in my day-to-day business life, having had the experience of sitting on a board of a charity.
Well, that's quite interesting as well, isn't it? Actually going in without experience, it means that you're not sort of, you've not got preconceived ideas. And that's probably always welcome from those that are around you, but also that willingness to learn as well and take that into your business life, regardless of how long that's been, must have been quite helpful for you.
Yes, definitely. And you also are sitting alongside people with very varied backgrounds. So there's an opportunity to learn quite a lot. I mean, there were several experienced businessmen who'd been partners in or managers of various organisations for many years and who knew things I'd never even come across or fortunately never had to deal with. So it was quite useful and also helped build up a little bit of a network for me for people to interact with, which always useful to discover you're not the only one experiencing the things you experience running a business.
Well, it's quite funny that you've put it exactly that way, because that's what we at the Leaders Council, try and do with a lot of our events. It's introducing people from cross-industry, cross-sector, people that would never generally come across each other, so that there's a bit of a support network, people that can understand the sometimes we say the loneliness of being at the top and, actually giving a supporting hand. But, one of the areas that you came on and you were talking about previously during the lockdowns was some of the sort of struggles that it was for being a solicitor, but also being a senior partner, having to deal with the business side. Do you think that that's got more difficult over the past few years, given the challenges that have been going on, or do you think it's now starting to ease and got a little bit easier?
If it has got easier, I have to say I didn't notice. It's always tricky when you start in something like a law firm, because you get made a partner because you're a good lawyer. And then, of course, you discover that you're now in a management role. You have, of course, no training for it. You may well be suited to it, you may not. But it's a totally different job and sometimes a totally different mindset to your sort of normal legal work. And that does take quite a while to adjust to for a lot of people. And I know it certainly did for me. I mean, I had the benefit of a senior partner with a lot of experience who kept us going at a time when I really wouldn't have had a clue what I was doing. So there is that. But it's certainly, the longer you do it, the easier it gets in that you're going, I've been through this before. I know how to deal with it. I know what I'm doing. I know what I did wrong last time. I'll do it slightly better this time. So
Yeah.
you have to do it a lot better, but we are what we are.
Oh, I like that though. I like that. Always small improvements. Small improvements every day means that over the long term they turn into big ones. And as you reach those hiccups in the road, you'll eventually be able to just deal with them very nicely and very easily and very calmly, which is quite important. But obviously one of the main challenges, especially within law at the moment, there's so many issues that are going on at the moment. We have from a larger perspective, we've got legal issues when it comes to legislation post Brexit. We have dealing post COVID with backlog. We have legal aid and barristers with strikes going on, and then obviously some of the upticks in the unfortunate parts of people being at home, increased rates of domestic violence, domestic issues, divorce rates over the past couple of years. Has that had are you finding a knock-on effect for yourself as well?
Definitely. It's quite interesting seeing the impact of COVID over our workload. Divorce work, family work has certainly seen an impact. At the beginning of the lockdown, we had a lot of calls from people talking about problems with contact and the issues with a child going between two households, particularly if one of the parents had jobs that, I had one call regarding a father who was a paramedic. And mum wasn't keen on him having contact. So there were a number of issues like that to start with. But as time has passed, we've had an increasing number of people come in saying, yeah, it was okay before lockdown, but then my husband started working from home and we were seeing each other all day and that finished it. So definitely a certain amount of that. The other thing we have seen, and this, I must admit, I've asked a few other solicitors this because I was wondering whether it was just us. But the psychological impact of the lockdown is noticeable in that I think the average individual we deal with is slightly more difficult to deal with than they were before COVID. Okay. And there are always people who are harder or easier to deal with. But on average, fewer cases are settling at an earlier stage. Arguments that would have been settled at an earlier stage are going further down the process before getting to a resolution. You're also getting just more stressed than we are used to. And as I say, I've asked a number of other solicitors whether that's just our experience. And everybody I've spoken to so far said they've had the same experience. But,
that is interesting, isn't it? It's as though people reach boiling points, but just stayed there and dug their heels in, and then there's from what you're saying, it seems like there's a level of stubbornness that potentially has come with it as well. The need to be on top. Yeah. Is that am I getting that correct?
I think something like that. It's difficult to say exactly, but I have not just in the law, but in other businesses where you're dealing primarily with the public. There seems to be a common refrain that more complaints, more people who are angry and needing more effort to settle them and reassure them. And you add that into, I've got clients who work in schools, and the impact on children, the number of children in needing psychological support is significantly higher than it's ever been. They've got more kids on their books than ever before. And it has an interesting impact on us because it means that you're dealing more and more with people who are stressed. And we're dealing with people very often who are stressed to start with because of the type of situations we're dealing with. But it means you've got an extra layer of effort that's required to manage expectations and, just to provide the same service. You've got to do more than you were doing 2 years ago. Whether that will continue or whether it'll settle back down, I've absolutely no idea. But it's been really noticeable over the last year.
Well, that's interesting as well. That's the external, that's the client or the people that you're dealing with. Are you then having to provide extra support to your staff, to yourself, taking a bit more of a step back and trying to remain level-headed during these times? Is there anything that you've had to sort of improve upon to make sure that these stress levels or these anger levels aren't translating into the way that you're dealing with things as well?
Yes. Now, a couple of things on that really, because we've had 2 or 3 staff who've had significant personal difficulties, elderly relatives, for example, which has meant a huge strain on them. Had to rearrange the way our office is laid out to ensure that people who've got high-risk relatives are coming into minimum contact. And the thing which I found most difficult of all, before COVID, we had a regular monthly staff meeting. We'd have a lot of interaction between people. During the course of the pandemic, that, of course, massively reduced. And so you have a certain amount of Zoom interaction, but it's not the same. I mean, it's better than nothing, but it's not the same. And then communication with people. Instead of being able to communicate in one go in a meeting, you can send out emails, you can see people one-to-one. But it was much more difficult to maintain communication. And you also had less idea of how it was being received. If you've got 20 people in a room and you're giving them good, bad, neutral news, you can kind of gauge the reaction, you can get the feeling of the room. You're sending out an email or doing that on Zoom, it's much more difficult to assess.
Absolutely. I found that, it's those unspoken cues, isn't it? The odd shift, the eye movements, the general tension or not, or release of tension in many respects, sometimes depending on what the conversation is, that happens. So no, I completely agree. That must be difficult, especially when you are dealing with such, stressful circumstances.
Yeah, very, very much so. And I think we've had one or two of our staff, not totally unexpected, but they've lost elderly members of the family, not to COVID, but other conditions. But you can see the impact of the fact that they were alone to a significant extent in dealing with that. And it then takes longer to process, longer to deal with. Things that take a month to process are taking 2-3 months to process. So there's a good deal of patience required in addressing that. And when you're dealing with people, their work performance hasn't changed, it hasn't deteriorated, but they're struggling with more. So the output you're getting is taking time, and we can see it beginning to return to normal now. We are past, I think, the worst of that. But during the last year, it's strange. Almost the first lockdown was almost living in an area which had fairly low COVID levels. If you had a decent house, it really wasn't too bad. But with the second lockdown and then the possibility of a third one late last year, you could really see a degree of exhaustion and just managing staff through that, and with people with very different risk levels. So you've got people who absolutely minimize contact, every safety precaution at all times, and other people who just, I've had enough, I can't do this anymore. And you're dealing with those people in neighbouring rooms.
Yeah, that's it's juggling the personalities, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And people had different views at different periods during the last 2 years as well.
Yes. Some people have managed, or have taken a back step and got a little bit more, worried about the situation. Some have just ploughed on and got over it, really, haven't they? It has it is very much on a case by case basis, very, very personal. But is there anything that you implemented from your time, whether it's from running the business, from taking on something, personal challenge, or personal development, that you're actually feeling like was a good thing that came out of this that you're going to be continuing with?
Some of the computerization that we've done, and the legal profession, there are lawyers who are terribly advanced, but the legal profession is not the world's most forward-looking when it comes to modernisation. And I'll make no comments about the fact that barristers still wear 18th century wigs. So some of that, things that we talked about doing, thought we might get round to, thought would be a good idea one day. Okay, this is a lot simpler. I mean, just today, for example, we've got 2 offices, and I needed to meet with 2 of my colleagues, one of whom is at the main office where I work, and one is at the other one. And we were desperately trying to figure diaries out, and then just worked out, actually, we'll put my colleague in the subsidiary office on Zoom, my colleague here at Winton and myself met together, and it was just so simple.
Yeah.
And again, although Zoom is not as good as face-to-face, it's better than telephone. And there are because again, at least you've got some face-to-face contact. So there are little things like that help. As far as to some extent, it's just emphasised to me and the importance of proper interaction within, particularly a small firm, within teams, and the need to have regular interaction, regular updates, and not just rely on email communication. I'd like to say, of course, we've taken that fully on board and are doing it as well and as thoroughly as we should. But we are, and we're still working our way through different ways of doing it, different things. But
it will be a continual evolution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And that's quite interesting. Again, the way that you've said. That you will be continuing with these, that it has forced a few changes. It seems to have done that across so many industries, just, accelerated that digitization in many respects of all different types of work and ways of working, and the embracing of some of the ease in communication and technology, really. But sometimes even just cutting out some of the face-to-face meetings that weren't quite so necessary before as well, which is always a bonus when you're not spending 2 hours a day just doing superfluous chats for no reason. But it's also, the Law Society recently published some of its findings looking at remote hearings, digitization, the pros and cons, and actually, it was one of their highlighted concerns was family law as being too difficult, that they needed sort of in-person hearings, in-person meetings, in-person, sort of results, really. There were obviously others, but they really highlighted that family was one of the issues, being one of your specialisms. Do you think that's something you would agree with?
To an extent, yes. Yes, in part. And I think it really depends on the type of hearing. There's an awful lot of work that is technically a court hearing, but really is admin. You're at an early stage. What you're really doing is setting out the parameters of the case, what you're going to do, and so forth. And most of the time, that's fairly routine, and it's work that really can be done remotely. And in fact, in many ways, it's better done remotely. The situation where you really, really benefit from face-to-face is any time when you're trying to get a negotiated settlement. To negotiate well online, it's not impossible, and I've done a couple of interesting mediations with very well-established suites, breakout rooms, etc., that have worked very well. But there is something about being face-to-face that makes a difference. I mean, you only have to look at something like Twitter. People say things on Twitter that they would almost never say face-to-face. And so you're almost forced to be more reasonable face-to-face. So it also means you can go backwards and forwards. You can get a better feel as well for what the parameters are. Because if you're just doing a remote meeting, things can be very black and white. Whereas if you're face-to-face, again, the verbal cues, you go, okay, there's a little room for manoeuvre here. This is worth pursuing. You can feel that out much better face-to-face. So anything that requires that we're going to try and settle, we're going to try and make serious progress.
Yeah.
Yes, it makes a difference being face-to-face, and I would broadly agree. There are exceptions, and I think I get a little nervous that the courts will just go back to, well, we were doing it face-to-face before, that's how we should do it, everything should be that way. I think there is a lot of potential efficiency to be gained. And there's just the benefit for myself and my client doing a 10-minute hearing remotely, in which I can sit at my desk. My client comes in and joins me half an hour beforehand. We do the hearing. Because it's remote, it's largely on time, which face-to-face hearings have a nasty habit of not being. And so an 11 o'clock hearing means I'm marking out my diary from 10 till 12, but in fact I'm probably only taking up half 10 to half 11. That means less of my time, cheaper for the client, and it is a fairly efficient way of running things. But if you're looking at anything, so I think the admin, and here there are a lot of court hearings which are really, particularly in the early stages of cases, which are administration. I mean, there are always exceptions, and occasionally things come up you didn't expect, and there are tactics and so forth to admin sometimes.
And tradition shouldn't be tradition. It shouldn't just be tradition for tradition's sake. Going in and making sure that you're having these face to face all the way through. It is people do need to embrace these changes.
Yeah, I mean, when you take, for example, if you're arguing over finances on a divorce, the standard court process has 3 hearings, and the first directions appointment is primarily an admin hearing that I think works extremely well remotely. The second hearing, which is an attempt to resolve the case, should be face-to-face. And I've had actually, leaving aside the Law Society's research, I've had 3 different judges tell me that the results they've had with face-to-face hearings are so much better than remote hearings.
Well, that's something then, isn't it? It's sometimes there does need to be then the in-person contact, the eye contact from across the room, or sometimes lack thereof. But it's I'm sure these things will get worked out over time. But anything that you obviously want to contribute into this discussion, the Leaders Council are happy to put forward and have these things as well. So that's an interesting viewpoint. But I just want to move on to something. We do a little bit of prep, ask a few questions prior to these interviews, and one of the challenges that you raised as being something that had happened that was major was a loss of key staff recently. Can you explain a little bit more about what that means and what happened?
A couple of things really. We had, for all the time I've been with the firm, which is 22 years now, we have had a significant proportion of legal aid work. And there are a number of things you need for legal aid. Apart from the expertise, you also need certain accreditations. And because of the changes over the last sort of 10, 12 years, what we do on legal aid is very different to what we used to do a decade ago. And our main lawyer on that, he loved working remotely because he lived an hour away and it meant he didn't have to drive in. So a lot of benefit for him. But he decided to take a job closer to his home address because, of course, we were getting back towards more working in the office, and having been quite enjoying not driving for 2 hours a day, I think it was. I think there were a couple of other personal reasons for him. Nothing bad with the firm. Let's finish on very, very good terms. But we had a very long look at our legal aid contract. It's something we periodically look at because it makes enough money that it covers its costs, and every now and again you get a bit more, and so on. So when he gave his notice in, we sat down and actually went through several years of figures to work out the benefit and realised that although it covered its costs, it didn't do much more, and that therefore losing the department really didn't have much of an impact on the firm. So we've actually, effective this month, stopped doing legal aid for the first time in our history.
Wow.
Which is a bit of a wrench for us. But the loss of key staff, you always think of these things as negatives. But this one forced us to sit down and go, okay, what actually is the benefit of this department? We've talked about it on and off, but it's been fine. It's never been a big deal. So we've been able to, tick along and not worry. But because of this mini crisis, if you put it that strongly, we actually sat down, took a much more detailed look than we've taken at any other point, and went, this isn't really benefiting us. What it does, it gives us a bunch of extra stress, a ton of paperwork, and even though the money more or less covers its costs, the scheme by which the legal aid agency pays is so bureaucratic that the payment tends to be quite erratic. You don't get a kind of steady income through the year. So I think it was the end of April this year before legal aid costs had covered themselves. Wow. We're now ahead of that. But you're looking at that and just going, no, this really isn't worth us putting the effort into recruiting a new person. And they're difficult to find. The lawyers who do the type of work we were doing tend to be very experienced, very few in number. There aren't many young lawyers going into it, at least the solicitors. So finding anybody who's any good is tricky. And we don't want to do the work unless we're going to do it well. So it again, it's something I've noticed over the years. I mean, this is a particular recent one, but sometimes it's the problems and issues that force you to do the things you really should be doing in better times. But because of that, you can actually take negatives and turn them into positives for the organisation.
Yeah, it means that you are taking a look at yourself sometimes, doesn't it? Rather than just sort of continuing again, because it's what you've always done. But yeah, as I mentioned at the start, it is one of those issues that is affecting, the entire law, I'm going to say industry. As it stands at the moment, the legal aid issues, and as I mentioned, barristers going on strike. I think only for the second time in their history. But let's see, it's going to be an interesting series of conversations that are going on over the next year. I think, as the backlog is caught up with the changes within law courts are in effect, and hopefully there's more funding for people to actually earn a wage doing it. But it's
a nice thought, but I always think the difficulty when you're campaigning on legal aid cuts is that what you're in effect doing, or what everyone sees you as doing, is asking for more money for lawyers. And there's a surprisingly small amount of public support for that.
Well, it's sometimes we're lucky that then the public don't have to, run everything. But it's can't go too far down that road. Otherwise, I think I'll get told off. But one of those.
Well, if either of us were planning on running for leadership, I think that just went for a burden.
Absolutely, might cut that part out of the final podcast interview, but I would think on that one. But as we sort of come to a close, I just want to ask, and I always like to finish on this. What have you got coming up? Have you got any plans, any changes? Are you personally going to be doing anything new? Joining a new board, taking on a new role?
To be honest, I'm hoping to step away completely from citizens' advice. I've been on the board for over 15 years, and I think it's about time they found a new lawyer for the locality. But apart from that, what I'm then hoping to do is find a new challenge. There's possibly a college nearby that needs an additional governor, which I'm looking at. So that might be exciting. Apart from that, we as a firm, we are finding our feet again after COVID and just starting to feel like we know where we are again. So some interesting possibilities. Difficult to say too much at this stage, but hopefully some interesting developments over the next year.
Well, Matthew, that was absolutely great. Interesting to be hearing your viewpoints really on a quite a range of issues. And, hopefully once you've got those business elements, sorted, we can have you back on another year and have another chat about the changes or not that have been going on. But, if people want to find you, if they want to find Gales Solicitors, where would they be going?
Okay. There's our website. And if you search Gales Solicitors Bournemouth, that should find us. And if you are in the locality, we are in North Bournemouth, in a little area called Winton, which is one of the more exciting areas of Bournemouth. And we also have a Facebook page, so Gales Solicitors on Facebook is available, and we do try and respond to email inquiries on either Facebook or the website fairly quickly.
Brilliant. Well, Matthew, thank you ever so much for coming on today.
No problem. My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you and goodbye.